Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Welcome to today's episode. We are going to talk about a juicy subject. Why do you work for free?
Do you work through lunch?
Do you attend meetings at lunch?
How about teach for free?
Do you give talks without compensation?
Do you respond to patient emails and address results when you're not at work?
In the last week or two, this issue of working for free in medicine and the culture of it has come up a multitude of times. And it's evidence that when we shift our attention to something, we notice it everywhere. And as such, we have decided to have a podcast on the culture of working for free. Why do we work for free? And choosing with intention when we want to work for free. And at the outset, we do want to give the disclaimer that we are not discouraging volunteerism, and we are not discouraging altruism or the giving spirit. What we are encouraging is being mindful of your giving spirit and giving you the option of saying no when it feels out of alignment and saying yes when it feels in alignment. What I notice in coaching and why this is such a relevant topic for the Mindful Healers podcast is that many of us have a lot of frustration and resentment about the things that we do, and or a lack of appreciation for we feel not appreciated for the giving that we do.
Our intention for today is to have a frank conversation about the expectations that physicians work for free. Takeaways include recognition that we've been indoctrinated into an archaic system with truly unrealistic expectations of healthcare professionals, and that it's key to recognize with mindfulness when we are complicit in this, and that it's okay and necessary to say no and to set up our own boundaries, because ultimately, no one can take better care of ourselves than us.
You don't have to accept that this is how it's always been done. And many of us do that. And we will have a conversation about how to do that. And we hope at the end that you will decide that if you are going to work for free, that you will notice that that's what you're doing, acknowledge it, and intentionally decide it's of value to you. And if it's not, that you stop and either ask for compensation, perhaps creative compensation, or decide to opt out.
So, inviting you now to take a moment to pause and settle. If it's safe for you to do so, you can feel free to close your eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you. And if it's not, then simply keep your eyes open. Inviting you to notice the points of contact between you and the environment, the ground beneath your feet. If you're sitting, the cushion against your legs, chair back, and the sensations along the body. literally grounding you here, reminding you that you're supported unconditionally. And with that, blinking open eyes, if they were closed, taking a moment to notice how you feel now compared to at the start of the podcast.
And feeling more calm and relaxed, we will dive into a conversation about the culture of medicine, where good doctors do lots of things for free. And to highlight many of the things that we do for free, many of us teach. And this podcast was initially inspired by both Ni-cheng and I having to renew our teaching appointments in large academic healthcare systems. And in doing such, we had to document numbers of hours, fill out paperwork, provide documentation, do modules to make ourselves eligible, et cetera. And this got us having a conversation together about how do you decide when this is in alignment and when this is out of alignment. And I realized in this conversation that I had been volunteering for 20 years and volunteering, a required 50 hours a year. But when I did hospital attending, I volunteered over 200 hours a year. And so I started to add that up and realized that, wow, that was a contribution that I had made that I had, one, not acknowledged to myself, two, that I had not consciously made, that I was going to volunteer all of this extra time. And while perhaps we do teaching while we are covering the hospital, we all know it takes extra time. You end up staying later, your notes end up getting done later. We do lots of noon conferences that we prepare for at different times when we're not being paid. And so thinking about the rationale of donating 200 hours, for 10 years and 50 hours for another 10 years, that's a lot of free hours to have made without even realizing that that's what I was doing and remembering that that's the culture. We also, as leaders, donate a lot of time. And as a former chief, we donate many more hours than we are given for admin time when you are chief or chair of a department. And I coach many chiefs and chairs on this. We also do a lot of things that are not our job. Our over responsibility gets us into doing a lot of free things. We tend to plan a lot of parties and send surveys and go to a lot of meetings during lunchtime for which we're not paid. And we take many calls after hours. And while, yes, this is what leaders do, there is some point at which we have to decide what is of value to our role. And what I see these days is a lot of chiefs wondering if they want to be chiefs or how to make the role meaningful and purposeful. And I think it's really important to think about what we're giving for free, what is part of our job, and setting boundaries, which is something we are going to talk about.
On top of all of that, the leadership positions oftentimes include needing to hold space, and the holding space includes time after hours, even locations that aren't even potentially on campus, for complaints, grievances, to help mitigate disputes, for instance. So that also adds on top of the free work.
And one thing I want to add that adds on top of that free work is when you are involved in holding space for complaints, grievances, and mitigating disagreements, we tend to ruminate about them. And so that adds in even more free work because we tend to be unsettled when things are unsettled and when people are struggling, and we are people pleasers and we want to make things right. And so holding space for those particular topics actually adds in a whole lot of extra free work. The other thing I didn't mention in leaderships, but a lot of people who are program directors, not only do they do their interviews and take care of folks and help deal with grievances after work, they also do a lot of evening dinners and recruiting and a lot of time outside of their paid time. And again, we're not suggesting that you don't do it. We're suggesting that you be aware of it and decide what of it is meaningful and what of it is not meaningful to you, and figuring out different, more creative ways. We also tend to speak for free. Many times, especially in academics, we get asked to give talks without compensation. very often. Very often, in my experience, wellness talks, people especially want you to do for free because for whatever reason, there isn't funding for that, yet we know it's important. And so again, it isn't that you don't speak for free. It isn't that you overvalue yourself, but realizing how much time it takes to prepare a talk and give a good talk. It's a lot more than the hour of the talk that you put in. And so making sure that there is some compensation. Perhaps the compensation is time off. Perhaps the compensation is something else that you would like. Again, I think creative compensation is a really beautiful thing. And referring you back to the negotiation podcast, it's not necessarily about money. It's about noticing what people need, including you. And then one of the things I've also noticed through coaching is a lot of extra time given to patient care. And this one I want to really call out because many of us do it from this place of giving and service, and a good doctor is always available. And yet, when you cover calls when you're not on call, maybe because you know the patients or because they're a special patient or because it's something you know more about, number one, that depletes you and makes it harder for you to be an effective physician when you are on call. But it also can potentially be dangerous in that you may or may not be available all the time. You may or may not get to a point of tremendous fatigue. And sometimes I think while we think we're doing good, we aren't actually helping.
Also, sometimes you're asked to actually cover calls because the colleague that was supposed to be able to be reachable couldn't be reached.
Yeah. And we answer patient emails when we're not working. I used to do this all the time. My brain told me it was faster. I would just do it here, but then you'd get another email. And then the expectation was, as always, when we do this stuff and we do more and more and more of it, that we can do it, should do it. And that's the expectation that things will get answered. It's not timely. You know, someone will say, well, I emailed you on Saturday. I haven't heard back. It's Monday. Well, we set the standard when we do things for free, I will say, or do things on our off time. And then the other thing I wanted to throw in here is covering for maternity leave and colleagues who are on medical leaves and potentially vacation. So in many other industries, when someone's on maternity leave, they hire someone to fill in, or when someone is on prolonged medical leave. In medicine, our culture has generally been that we will just distribute their patients and take care of them in their absence. And this is also true, I think, in residency. If someone's out, everyone else ends up taking more call. And it creates a lot of tension in the culture. And I think that until we speak up and let people understand how much extra work that's adding to our own work already, things won't change. There are such things as per diem locums and pool support, but somehow most of our institutions have not made that the standard. And so acknowledging and realizing what we are contributing without additional compensation. Maybe they want to compensate us for all those patients. Most of us don't have capacity to take it on. But if we just continue to do it without being mindful, which is without noticing and being aware of what we're doing, and without choosing to do it intentionally, that's where we get off track. Anything else that we do for free that we missed here, Ni-cheng?
One popular one I've noticed in the more than a decade of being in clinics is the very common practice of covering the in-basket with patient calls and results on days off, like for instance on vacation, or even when you're just taking a day off, or when it's just like an office holiday.
Yeah. And I think I used to do that all the time. And I would tell myself doing it, say on, a holiday, Monday, that it would make my Tuesday better. And that I needed to do it to make my Tuesday better. But then of course, the expectation is you can do more and more and more and more. So we've covered a lot of things that we do for free in medicine, or we do on our off time, many of which have become standard of care. And so I'm guessing that many of you can think of others, and I encourage you to pause and be mindful and think of these others, to notice them, pay attention, and make a choice. Again, we're not advocating that you don't do things that feel of value to you. You don't volunteer, you're not altruistic, and you're not giving, but to notice where you're giving and making sure that's where you want to be giving. So many people feel that we are over capacity, and yet we do nothing to change it. And so we wanted to talk a bit, not just about how to stop working for free, which the number one step of that is to notice where you are working for free. But we wanted to talk about why we work for free, because I think if we understand the brain patterns behind it that are leading to this behavior, it's going to make it easier to make change. And so the number one reason we work for free, in my mind, is that it's a habit, it's a default, and that we've been doing it for so long that we don't even notice that we are doing it.
And the other aspect, honestly, most of medical training was pretty traumatic. If you think about it, we were subjected, many of us before duty hour restrictions came into play. So even anywhere from 80 to 120-hour work weeks or more, depending on your program. And then I lived in medical training by the adage that one of my senior residents told me: eat when you can, sleep when you can, and pee when you can. I mean, that is not a healthy, well-being conducive type of philosophy to abide by during medical training when you're trying to heal others. And then on top of that, with call, you're working 36, sometimes up to 48 hours with little to no sleep. And then you're also vulnerable and subjected to a lot of potential verbal abuse from your attending, supervising residents, patients, and even other staff members. So I wanted to share a quote by Dr. Thema Bryant. Trauma teaches you to expect and accept the bare minimum. Thankfully, gratefully, very necessarily, training is more humane now, but many of us did not have many of the measures set in place today, like the duty hour restrictions and even mandatory well-being curricula.
And that reminds me of one of Charlie Mackessy's quotes, which is, "Do not measure how valuable you are by the way we are treated." And so many of us were treated this way, and that is how we measure our value, that our time is not of value, that we don't deserve compensation. And again, we've come to accept this as normal. And so a reminder as a theme in this podcast, which is just because it's always been that way doesn't make it right. And I would add, doesn't make it safe. So the next reason that I think we work for free is that we tell ourselves it's expected. It is what a good doctor would do. And when I was raised in medicine, which is what I like to call medical school and residency, it is what a good doctor would do. They would volunteer. In fact, the expectation was that really we shouldn't be paid for our work. It was just our duty to serve and give. And because everyone else did it, that was what was expected. What I would point out now is that it became the norm in a very different time in medicine, and that perhaps now it's an outdated practice. And when we had our own practices and we were doing different things and we were perhaps training the person who would replace us directly, it was a very different way of approaching teaching and learning and growing. And so I think just realizing that we are in a different time and place, and the medicine we're practicing is different. And maybe these old expectations aren't relevant now. And maybe they aren't even expectations. Maybe they're our own expectations of ourselves.
Yeah, currently medicine is practiced very differently than decades ago, like as recent as decades ago. Now at our fingertips, so this is like a double-edged sword with both good and bad. We have hundreds of thousands of pieces of data that we can access that in many instances we're expected to review and assimilate and process much of the time for free, thanks to the electronic medical record. And then also nowadays, unfortunately, most large healthcare systems and insurance companies prioritize profit over time and human connection.
And we as physicians prioritize time and human connection. And this is why we end up in this catch-22 of working so much for free, right? I was coaching last night and someone was talking about how their before lunch patient, they tend to just spend more time with them because they can. And they tell themselves this, well, this is what I value in medicine is the human connection. And this is the only space where I have more time to do it. And yet then they don't get a break before their afternoon unit. Again, working for free, our brain tells us, you know, this is what we need and want to do, and this is how we can love our jobs. And there are a lot of inherent conflicts in the way we practice medicine today.
Another reason why we work for free has been ingrained in our DNA for eons as human beings, because we are a mostly tribal species. We do, at least once upon a time, we relied upon the community, the village, the tribe, much more than we do now. But that has resulted in our default programming being that there is an instilled fear of rejection, of being judged, and then also being labeled as lazy or complacent. So some things that I have thought about when I used to be afraid of setting boundaries or saying no to free work is, what if this person thinks less of me because I don't agree to do this task? And what if this patient dislikes me and ends up, in an air quotations, fires me?
And people pleasing, I think, is a huge piece of why we work for free. We do not want to disappoint people. Not only do we not want to be fired, but we don't want anybody to be disappointed in us. And that word disappoint is very triggering for many, many people. We want people to like us, love us. We want our patients to love us. And so we tend to do things where we don't love or like ourselves, but in the hopes that other people will like and love us. And this fear of rejection, I think, you know, comes up tribally, as you mentioned, species wise, but it was also ingrained in us in our training. If you go back to residency, right, if you didn't fit in there and you weren't a chameleon and belonged on rounds, there was a big problem. And so that is often why, you know, we value things. You know, in my old practice, almost everybody taught for free. And it was considered prestigious to do that. And we had to fit in and people please to be part of that. And of course, this just has us doing more and more things where we end up more and more exhausted and overgiving.
And I'm just going to point out that this is a really long list of why we work for free. And it continues. So the next reason is catastrophizing. So we are experts at catastrophizing. We were trained in medical school to catastrophize on behalf of our patients. And then also I was reflecting when I was doing some research for this and just thinking back to my own medical training experience, that if we didn't catastrophize enough, then we could actually risk getting humiliated on rounds. So it was kind of a protective strategy for myself to catastrophize a lot for our patients to get the right list of differential diagnoses on rounds so I could answer that question an attending would ask us on rounds. And also the fear that if we didn't know it all or do it all, maybe our patients would suffer and that I would potentially miss something and make a mistake.
And both of those would cause trauma, right? Humiliation is trauma. And if something bad happened to your patient, that would cause trauma. So it is protective and was protective, but it's not sustainable.
Mm-mm.
And the next one is another common thought pattern, our over responsibility, self-sacrifice. I put it all in one category today: martyrdom, toxic independence. It's our job to you know, take care of our colleagues' patients if they happen to be out. It's our responsibility to educate the next generation. It's important that we give back to medicine. And again, I would say some of these were relevant in a different time in medicine, but now who are we giving back to? Who is benefiting from us covering our colleagues? It's not actually our colleagues. It's someone else, a bigger institution. And so just considering where these thought patterns may be playing in, and if you happen to have them, which I would argue that almost everyone in medicine does, deciding what you want to do about them. Do you want to be making decisions from these default thought patterns, or do you want to do the work to be mindful and notice them, and then be intentional and begin to change them from a place of kindness, not from a place of judgment or being mean to yourself, but from a place of kindness to yourself and your family and your patients and the culture and practice of medicine going forward?
Another reason why we work for free is the lack of boundaries. And this is a word I'm highlighting. This is one of my words for this year. And honestly, it's coming up in a whole new uncomfortable way for me in medicine. And the fact is that we weren't really taught self-preservation related boundaries in medicine. We were taught the opposite. The early advice, which can be applicable to some in our careers, was to say yes to everything. Actually, I now fervently disagree with this, and I want to amend that statement to say yes to what you are curious about and that which is in alignment for you. And I think that I've had difficulty with setting boundaries because of all of the above reasons just mentioned. And that the fact is that if we always did say yes and then do it, where does that leave the rest of our priorities, like our family, our own self-care? And actually saying yes too much is harmful to our self-care. And if you continue to say yes indiscriminately, they'll keep asking you.
And in fact, not only do they keep asking you, it almost becomes an expectation. They maybe even stop asking you, and it's just what everybody does. I wanted to reflect on boundaries. The way that I teach boundaries and help people set boundaries in coaching is to come at boundaries, of course, from love. And if you think about boundaries not as someone will be disappointed or I'm holding steady, but that they come from a place of love, that you're not overgiving is not love. People pleasing is not love. Doing things because you're afraid of disappointing or being rejected is not love. So what would love for yourself, what would love for your family, those really important priorities, or love for your patients or love for the future of medicine do? Because I think love for the future of medicine would change the culture around physicians working for free to the degree that we do, thinking back about that huge, long list.
So now we're going to share some aspects from our real life about our journeys in working for free. And most recently, I've decided to make a pivot. So I've been in a volunteer position that's been very in alignment for me, especially with my core value of compassion. It's one where I teach medical students and I see patients for free. And I've been doing this for 12 years. And I still definitely enjoy aspects of it, but I'm noticing, especially in this last year, the activation energy, the emotional cost, and actually the time cost for me to do this is getting really expensive, especially with having to maintain this from the reappointment applications, the mandatory computer training modules. All of that maintenance, it detracts from my much more important to me needed presence with my family, especially during crucial time points for my kids. And then also it detracts from my own ability to self-care, especially when I'm settling in with my postmenopausal self. I'm also realizing in reflecting back that I'm already serving the underserved and I'm already teaching and already doing this in areas of my life that aren't so emotional and time costly, from incorporating group clinic visits in my current established clinic schedule, so not working for free and building it into my already established practice. And within that time, I already teach mindfulness and other aspects of integrative health to my patients. And I'm also, even at the outset of joining this practice about 5 years ago, I'm already seeing patients where their insurances are not as resourced. And I continue to choose to do my volunteer work within national and state chapter related societies.
So my UCSF story, I shared a bit. And again, I would like to just say this is all on me. It's all what I decided to do. It's all what I did do. And it's really reflective of the fact that so much of what we do in medicine, we do without thinking about it. We do without being mindful about it. And so I have taught as a volunteer clinical professor at UCSF or some version thereof. They have all different kinds of names. Every 5 years, you get a new name. Um, it for my entire career. And what I really want to bring up here is that I wasn't mindful and I didn't notice that that's what I was doing. And I actually would do a lot of it again. I would just be a little bit more thoughtful about how much and when and where. And rather than getting tied up in the prestige of it or the a little bit of compare and despair, who else was doing it? What would people think of me if I did less? Making a conscious decision about how much of it was good for my life and at what point did I potentially want to pivot? I think a lot of people that I work with work in do a lot of teaching early on in their career. And then at some point, they tend to pivot towards something else. And I actually think that's beautiful because when I finished my chief residency, I loved teaching it. And I was the best teacher because I was right in it. And I had been, that was really my expertise at the moment. And so doing that for, my 200 hours a year in the first 5 to 7 years of my career, well, that was really of value. And I enjoyed it and I learned a lot. At some point, it became something that I just did. And I think what you brought up is when you notice the filling out the forms and you're feeling a bit resentful, it's like, those little clues along the way that, like, when you first are doing it and you fill out the forms, you don't feel resentful, you feel excited.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want to be really tuned into yourself and the things that you notice, figuring out where and what works for you. And then I think being really clear, do you love giving talks? Do you love actually having a student follow you? You don't have to do all the things. And I think for me, the lesson looking back is I was someone who did all the things. I did continuity clinic. I had the med students follow me. I had residents on the ward. You have all the things, and that potentially is too much. And so deciding perhaps at different times in your career, you can do something. Our scarcity mindset gets us into trouble. That's something we didn't mention. But if I don't do this, they'll never ask me again. Probably not true. My experience is they keep asking and they keep needing, and there's always a need. And then the other thing that I look back on my own sort of experience with not setting limits or really just having unreasonable expectations of myself was as a chief. And I just want to point out to those of you who happen to be chiefs that we kind of think as a chief, you're responsible for everything. And that's not actually true. It's on us again to ask for help and set boundaries from a place of love. But these days, it's actually hard to get people to be chiefs and to get them to stay because the job is really hard. Perhaps we shouldn't be planning parties. Perhaps we shouldn't be creating doodle surveys. And you all might laugh, but chiefs spend hours doing this stuff. Perhaps it's not our job to be choosing gifts for the whole department and for all the staff, et cetera. And so I think, again, the key here is mindfulness, because what ends up happening is we do it all from this place of over responsibility and thinking that this is our job when 99% of it's not in our job description. It's just what's been done. It's become the expectation over time because somebody did it. And man, as doctors, we could do so many things, right? Being really clear about what are your priorities, even in a certain role. What are your priorities as a volunteer clinical professor? What are your priorities as a chief? Are you in alignment with those? And when we don't pause and be mindful and think about it, we don't know. And then you'll wake up someday and think, wow, what am I doing? How did I get here? And the other thing is that other people will have been watching you. We're modeling this for all the people behind us, and we're creating expectations for them. And so I think when we are mindful, we're giving a gift to the entire culture of medicine. And the change starts with each one of us as individuals. We want the system to change. Maybe they should just, pay all the volunteer professors, but I think we have to speak up and each as an individual to begin, and then things will begin to shift. The other thing I wanted to reflect on is that I am actually a fan of doing things for free. I do a lot of things for free in my current business and my coaching practice, but I do them from a place of love. And I do them from a place of not so much that they benefit me, but that I enjoy them. But I do constantly check in large part because a lot of people ask me, why do you keep teaching yoga? You've been doing it for 4 years for free. Why would you do that? And again, it's these moments of checking in and saying, wow, I love that. It's still bringing me value. I see the value it's bringing to the world, and I enjoy it. And I'm doing it for aligned and meaningful reasons. It's a passion project. Same thing with a lot of the free coaching that I offer. You know, I offer those curious about coaching sessions because I know that our mindset is skepticism. And so to have people meet you and to have people learn the skills, that's why we do this literally podcast for free. Because it is meaningful and a value and has impact. And again, many of those other things that we do also have impact, but you have to decide where you want to make your impact and decide you can't make impact everywhere. So choosing what you do and where you do it.
So I wanted to share briefly where I am choosing intentionally to work for free. So currently I am very happy to cover my colleagues in baskets when they're on vacation so that they can completely unplug. I think that not working on vacation is so important to refill our energy stores, our passion for medicine, and they reciprocate that for me as well.
I want to interject though for a moment that I'm glad you do that. And do they give you time to do it? Because it's a job, it takes time. When someone's off, do you get even a half an hour to cover their in-basket, which we know it's way more than half an hour. And should that be the expectation? What if there's we actually realized this at one point in my practice, and we set up a system of a doc of the day who had a not full schedule where that person covered everyone who was out. If someone was on sick, they covered emergencies, they had flexibility in their schedule. And so thinking creatively within your own system, and I know every system is different and the incentives are different and how you get paid is different. So there isn't a one size fits all, but you know, doing it in the interim and asking for change or deciding how long this is reasonable before that a different system needs to be set up.
Yeah, and I encourage all of you to think about creative ways to fit the tasks that you are choosing to do for free within your own allotted time for work and not pile it on top of that. So thank you for mentioning those creative solutions. The other thing that I do for free, which is near and dear to my heart, is a mindful healthcare collective. In the beginning of the pandemic, we offered a lot of free well-being offerings, and you continue to do so, Jessie, for the reasons that you just mentioned. But noticing that many of the leaders of the Mindful Healthcare Collective aren't offering as many free well-being sessions for a multitude of different reasons, myself included. And that's okay. But the emails are still going out. The Facebook community is still alive and well. And we are still holding free well-being offerings when it speaks to the leader, where the leader of that particular session is doing it very mindfully and intentionally. And for me, for instance, the upcoming one that I will be leading is going to be book club. And I get so much out of leading book clubs that it doesn't feel like quote unquote working for free. I really enjoy that. So trusting your intuition and seeing where your values are in alignment so that you can choose with intention what you say yes to for free.
Love that. And I love MHC, and I want to encourage people who are listening, if you haven't joined us in the Mindful Healthcare Collective, you can sign up for the email list. You do not have to be on Facebook to do it. So the email list is at mindfulhealthcarecollective.com. You can sign up, or you can join us in the Facebook group, Mindful Healthcare Collective. And that is where you find out about the free yoga. That's where you find out about the free book club. That's where you find out about basically gifts from fellow physicians who have a lot of training and experience in wellness. And that is a passion project that is deeply aligned for those of us that do it. So we'd love to have you join us if that resonates. And what's beautiful about that is it's a community of people who think about mindfulness and medicine similarly. And so if you're looking for a place to belong, it's a lovely spot. So let's pivot to things that might help you shift your relationship with working for free. So the first one we've mentioned a few times in the podcast, noticing all the places that you work for free and deciding if it's aligned for you.
So speaking of alignment, what are we talking about? We are asking you to connect with noticing what value you yourself bring to who you are serving for free, but then also checking in with the alignment with your own core values that you yourself prioritize. And then asking yourself, do you even want to work for free? Is there some inherent value that you are in alignment with, or is it actually related to something that's been indoctrinated, or is it a trauma response, or is it part of a people-pleasing habit, or the fear of rejection?
And to help with that is my favorite question: what would love do, or what would compassion do, or what would kindness do? Because if we make decisions from love or compassion or kindness, or caring is another beautiful one in medicine. What would caring do for you, for your patients, for your colleagues? And I always throw in now the future of medicine. And asking that question that of yourself, what would love do for you? Would it do this work for free? What would compassion do for your patients and yourself and your colleagues and the future of medicine? Would it cover vacations? Right now, it probably would, until you can create a new system or advocate for a new system, knowing that change is slow in medicine. The other thing that I think is love, compassion, and kindness would assume that those in charge do care about you and do value you. I think we often go back to that saying from Charlie Mackesy that we are treated in alignment with our value. And that's not necessarily true. We have told people that they don't need to pay us for all these years, and so they don't. But that doesn't mean that we aren't valued. And I think many people tell this story that we're not valued, and that makes it very hard to move forward. And so I encourage you, love or compassion would not tell the story that you're not valued. Love and compassion would tell yourself a story that people do care and value and appreciate you, and have the reason that you do or don't do it come for different reasons. Love and compassion, I think, would also decide that change is possible for patients, for systems, for yourself. And love and compassion, I think, would also do no harm. And so some of these practices do harm to ourselves. Sometimes they do harm to patients when they expect an answer. If you've always answered on the weekend and they're expecting an answer to decide whether to go to the ER, that's actually not helpful, can be harmful. And so noticing where those practices cause harm, and I'll put it in quotes, to you, your family, your patients, or the culture of medicine. Like, if you do it, does it become an expectation? The other question that I think is really helpful is, what would sustainable do? Is your current approach sustainable? Are your current ways of thinking about volunteerism and what's expected after hours leading to burnout? And would sustainability speak up about something? Would it ask for compensation, creative compensation? Would it make a change in terms of the hours that you work? And so I like to think, what will your future self wish you had done? What if your speaking up helps everyone? What will you and everyone else in medicine miss out on, and potentially even patients, if you don't speak up?
So this one is definitely, for me anyway, easier said than done. Set boundaries. What I'm about to say might be repetitive. You probably have heard it before, but maybe not in this exact way. So no is a complete sentence, and ultimately reminding you that you hold the power as to when you invoke the no. And I want to actually quote Jessie, because I texted her. We often have these kind of like pretty powerful texts about what's going on in each other's lives that oftentimes leads to a podcast episode. And so from Jessie, when I was exploring the option of not continuing on in my volunteer position, she texted me back, give yourself permission to resign. Maybe it's time to focus on something else. And so that leads me to one of my favorite ways to set boundaries is that if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And so noticing also when boundaries are actually a reaction. So trusting in your intuition. So trust is another word of mine for the year. So if your initial reaction was a no, explore that. Like get curious about why there was an initial no without judgment. And then give yourself permission to follow that initial gut feeling no. But you can also choose after that exploration and realize that the cost might be worth it to you because the ultimate goal might be in alignment deeply for you, resonates, or simply because you want to try it. And also reminding you that you can say no later and pivot, and then you can go for it. Realizing that you have a choice.
You mentioned a few important things. One, pause. Sometimes we react to things. And so pausing and deciding, and I'm going to give you kudos that I think you didn't decide for 24 hours. You paused, collected your thoughts, sat down and listened. And if we don't pause, we can't listen and we don't know what is our true intuition. You mentioned trust, and I wanted to remind people of the Trust podcast, which I've gotten a lot of feedback about how to trust yourself and how to trust the process. And a reminder that we were taught in medicine not really to trust. And so listen to the podcast for tips. And trust is one of those things. It's one of your words. It's been a word that I've been working on for years. And it's something that takes work for those of us in medicine in particular to trust for so many reasons. And it's something that I believe mindfulness and coaching helps with tremendously. And it's just what you practice grows. So you can grow trust. And the other thing is that everything that we're offering here today is easier said than done. And so realizing, in fact, many of the things that we bring up in the podcast are easier said than done. And the invitation of the podcast is to throw out the ideas, to get your brain thinking. And we know that doing the work requires engaging in the work as we talk about. It requires, for me, it required developing a mindfulness practice, practicing, working with a coach, understanding how the mind works and mindset works. And so again, we are not advocating that you just decide and you make these shifts. What we're doing in the podcast is sending these ideas out to you, planting the seeds with the hope that you will come and work with us either personally on a retreat or on Zoom, and that this will be the beginning of a journey. So the next thing that I think will very much help is having a mission statement or setting an intention, defining your role. So what's your intention as a chief? What's your intention as a physician? What's your intention as a wellness leader? And deciding not what it's supposed to be or what it should be, but what you want it to be, getting out of the set expectations. And if you're moving forward from a place of I want to, I get to, I choose to, and you're choosing to do something uncompensated there, no problem. But if it's I have to, I need to, I should, that's expensive. And that's usually somewhere where you don't want to be doing it. So that's a simple question to ask.
For our reflection questions, I think that everything that we have shared has already included many questions, but I'm going to invite all of you to participate in our mindful moment. Notice that this is not at the end of the podcast after the sound of the singing bowl, but this is actually embedded into the body of the podcast on purpose, in that these reflection questions lend themselves really well to some journaling prompts. And so that's our mindful moment that we'd like to invite you to participate in. So, how are you currently working for free?
What if it is safer for you to not work for free and to be off when you're not working?
What duties, positions, responsibilities do you want to say no to now? What's holding you back? Is it your people-pleasing tendencies, a fear of rejection? With loving self-compassion and mindfulness, why and what are the barriers to setting those boundaries for you?
And as you pause with these questions, I also invite you to practice self-compassion, perhaps a hand to heart, pausing in a few breaths to recognize that this is not an invitation to judge yourself about how you got here. It's an invitation to decide to move forward non-judgmentally. How would you like to move forward? How do you want to move forward? How do you choose to move forward from here? If today's topic resonates, we also encourage you to reach out. You are not alone in this journey. And while we planted a seed today to begin to notice these things, we do understand that everything we've shared is much easier said than done. And we invite you to work with one of us or work with both of us, either around mindfulness, around coaching, or joining us for Connect in Nature at Green Gulch would be a beautiful place to begin your work. That is going to be September 6th to 8th, 2024. And almost half the spots are filled already. So if you're thinking about coming, please join us. It's a beautiful weekend at a Zen center by the coast and a beautiful place to settle into your parasympathetic nervous system and relaxation, while also thinking about how you want to move forward, being aligned and intentional with your life. And if that is too far away or the dates don't work, join us in the Mindful Healthcare Collective. Join me for a retreat this spring. I have a few at Sagrada that have spaces, and I have an honoring diastole retreat that happens before that. That's just one day, a way to dip a toe in, and or reach out for coaching. A last request at the end of today's podcast is many of our podcast topics come from requests from listeners. And so if you have a topic that you would like us to reflect upon in the Mindful Healers podcast, send us an email and we will consider devoting an entire session to it. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes, and please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely.